Paul Findlay may not be a giant in stature, but he is certainly a mountain of a man in his forthrightness, humanitarianism, and intellectual brilliance. He is a man of honor who is widely respected around the globe. Findlay graduated from college in 1943 with a Bachelor of Arts degree. One of Findlay's first jobs was to his country, where he patriotically joined the Navy during World War II to serve his country with honor. After completing his service, he began his career as an editor of a newspaper. Later, Findlay was elected and served as a U.S. congressman on Capitol Hill. He stayed in office for 22 years for the state of Illinois. During that time, he was well respected among his contemporaries, both Republicans and Democrats alike. U.S. President General Ford has called Findlay a good man and a fine friend. President Nixon also recognized Paul Findlay for his work. President Carter publicly praised Representative Findlay, and President Dwight Eisenhower respected Findlay. During Findlay's 11 terms in Congress, he authored several bills that went through. He was always an active participant, and the volumes of his work attest to this. Even in Findlay's hometown, he has received recognition for being an outstanding citizen. He has been made an honorary fireman and an honorary policeman as well. He even received the keys to the city. The governor of Illinois named Findlay laureate of the Lincoln Academy. While Findlay is a Lincoln buff, some have compared this intellectual giant Findlay to Lincoln. Findlay has received awards for his work with agriculture, and just recently he has been on the cover of the magazine Illinois Times. Findlay is an excellent writer and has 5 popular books to his credit: Silent No More, They Dare to Speak Out, Abraham Lincoln, The Federal Farm Fable, and Deliberate Deceptions. His books have been very well received. His book, They Dare to Speak Out, sold more than 300,000 copies in the U.S. alone. While this book was originally published in 1985, it was recently updated and republished in 2003 and has gained newfound publicity. His other books have been just as popular. Some of Representative Findlay's books have been translated into several different languages, including German, Arabic, Farsi, Urdu, Indonesian, and Malaysian. He has received an award from the President of Germany. He is widely respected around the world for his fair and even-handed look at world events. His writings go far on the internet. Although Paul Findlay graduated from an American college, he has also received honorary doctorates from several foreign universities. He has received honorary doctorates from several American universities in both humane letters and law, thus giving him the title doctor before his name as well. Findlay has appeared on both American and foreign TV stations to give interviews, even in areas where anti-American sentiment might be common amongst some of the general population. Findlay's message of fairness and honesty has made him well respected. In America, he has appeared on NBC, CBS, CNN, PBS, ABC, and many other stations, making well over 100 radio and television appearances. When Findlay has given lectures in the past, people have come from afar to hear him speak. Even when Findlay traveled to South Africa to give a speech, 15,000 people were in attendance. His voice may not be loud, but his messages have traveled far. Paul Findlay is a man who does not recognize the word hate. He focuses on common ground and works to build a better society. He has served on the Human Rights Commission, and he has been given numerous awards and honors for his fairness in dealing with others. He has even received recognition by the American Muslim Association. Findlay is also responsible for preventing age discrimination by stopping forced early retirement. Dr. Paul Findlay is the founder and chairman emeritus of the Council for the National Interest, a public think tank that promotes America's best interest when it comes to foreign policy. Attorney and former Congressman Paul McCloskey is the chairman of the organization, with former U.S. Foreign Services head Eugene Byrd serving as its president. Despite Findlay being in his early 80s, he is still sharp as a razor. He is still as hard-working as ever, and when Paul Findlay speaks, people really do stop to listen. And what he has to say now, just as he has told many others in the past, is quite shocking. He has something to say that every American needs to hear throughout the land, for he tells of how America has been stolen from its very citizens and is essentially controlled by a foreign government. The clock is ticking.
I don't believe my neighbors here in Jacksonville, my hometown since birth, have any idea how much trouble they are in, all of us in America are in. I came here after my service in Congress because we knew it would be a happy, peaceful place to be. But today, and I'm not an alarmist, I believe that our country is in the deepest hole it's ever been in, with the possible exception of the Civil War. It's deep, it's costly, it's bloody. I mention blood because our troops are now directly involved in the Middle East. They're in a difficult position that I think is going to stay difficult, stay costly. Nearly 1,000 lives have been lost. So far as I know, my hometown here in Jacksonville hasn't suffered its first fatality in the Iraqi war, but that day will come, I'm sure, because many of our citizens are over there now, under orders to do the best they can in Iraq. And the American people need to wake up to certain facts. Facts that should have been apparent many years ago, but for a variety of reasons simply are not. One fact is that Middle East policy is not treated as a foreign policy in Washington. Middle East policy is treated as a domestic policy because the lobby for the State of Israel is the most powerful, most intimidating lobby in Washington, certainly in foreign policy, and probably the most powerful and intimidating lobby of any of the 3,000 or more lobbies that do exist there. What needs to be recognized is that the policy we established for Israel has dire consequences for our entire nation. It's not just a question of money, although we've poured tremendous sums into the State of Israel. I can illustrate that very easily. The Christian Science Monitor, which is a very respected newspaper, recently published the results of a study. And that study reported that over $1.3 trillion is the price paid by U.S. taxpayers for the aid in various forms that we've provided to Israel since the year 1975. $1.3 trillion. That's not billions. That's 1.3 trillion. An immense sum of money. But that's not the real cost. The price we're paying now is a result of the bias in public policy that has characterized our policy towards the Middle East for at least 35 years. And I can speak with some authority because 22 of those 35 years I was sitting as a member of the House of Representatives on the Foreign Affairs Committee. I saw directly what was happening. I tried to change course for our country as best I could. My voice was a very lonely one, just about the only one in the entire Congress. House and Senate together, 535 members, and yet my voice was just about the only one that spoke out. The other voice was Pete McCloskey, my colleague from California. The two of us were really the only voices that spoke out with deep concern over the direction of U.S. policy in the Middle East. Our policy is made by forces here at home, lobbying forces here at home, whose main interest is not the U.S. national interest, but the national interest of the State of Israel. And I'm sure the lobbyists behind this process have never dreamed that the result of this bias in public policy would get us into the kind of trouble we're in today. They wanted a secure Israel. They wanted to defeat every one of Israel's critics here in this country. They wanted to dominate the legislation that deals with the Middle East, and they certainly succeeded. But the bias was totally pro-Israel and therefore anti-Arab, anti-Muslim. And when the bias that we have imposed in favor of Israel has spun out through the area, it has caused terrible misery for several million Arabs called Palestinians. Their plight has been agonizing. The control that our government has had over that their government has had over the policy of our own government has been total. One of the great respected leaders of Israel, former member of the Knesset, their parliament, once said that America rules the world, but Israel rules America. And he was right. Israel, through its lobby, has controlled public policy in the Middle East. This means that Israel has had everything it wanted or ever could use in terms of money, military power, political power, diplomatic power, moral power, public policy power. They've had everything so that they were able to get by with the humiliation and the destruction of an entire society, the Palestinian community. And this has been going on at an ever-increasing crescendo for 35 years. And now the chickens, in a sense, have come home to roost. Our country has lost 3,000 people in the avalanche of 9/11. We have lost, this date, about 1,000 people in our armed services working in Iraq. And there is no end in sight. We are in a hole. We are trapped, in a sense. And our national leadership has shown no sign whatever of changing. Our national leadership of both parties seems so intimidated, is the right word, intimidated by Israel's lobby, that they put America's national interest in the Middle East on the shelf. They pursue only what the state of Israel wants. And it has been a dreadful experience, not just for the American taxpayers, not just for the families who've lost people dead and injured in Iraq, but also for the entire nation. America was once revered. It was applauded worldwide, especially in the Middle East, as the country that would stand up for justice, for the rule of law, for peace, for cooperation, regardless of the nationality or the color or the heritage of the individuals or nations involved. Now we are reviled, not revered, but reviled worldwide. There was a time when the Arab state of Egypt was able to look to America to rescue it from a terrible military assault, an assault undertaken by Israel with the help of France and Britain. And the President of the United States at that time, Dwight Eisenhower, immediately on the eve of his own bid for re-election as president, he was willing to have a public showdown with Israel, to tell them frankly that if you want support from America, you have to behave. Can you imagine a president of the United States telling Israel, you have to behave or you get no help from us. You have to behave or we'll even do our best to get you expelled from the UN. Imagine that. But there was such a day. But unfortunately, the lobby has had such an intimidating effect year after year, no matter who's president, that even the commander-in-chief of U.S. military forces, all through those 35 years, the most militarily powerful person on earth, has not been able to pursue what is best for justice, what is best for peace, what is best for America. These are very difficult times for the entire world. And much of the difficulty we're in today can be traced to 35 years ago, when Congress began to enact heavily biased public policy. Policy that cost a lot of money, that would be totally supported without amendment, without any real debate. Year after year, the amount of money kept getting bigger and bigger every year. Meanwhile, this enabled the leadership of Israel to be much more aggressive, much more brutal in treating the Palestinians, who were largely in control of what is now Israel, to a large extent before the state was established in 1948. They were driven from their homes, they fled in fear. About 700,000 of them were fleeing their homes and never have been able to return. That policy beginning continued every year, fully understood by the rest of the world, but never fully understood here in America. It was American policy, but the reality of this policy and the cost of this policy, impact of this policy, has never really registered among the American people. They've been shielded by a variety of forces from the true picture. Now, I don't believe that the people that initiated this bias towards Israel ever dreamed it would lead us to 9/11. But I believe, step by step, what happened on 9/11 can be traced back to our bias in public policy. We have been for many years the most powerful nation on earth, with the most immense military and economic resources. And when this most powerful nation made available to Israel almost unlimited support, without conditions, without reservations, without restrictions of any kind, it naturally enabled the leadership of Israel to undertake military action and suppression and oppression to a far greater degree than it ever possibly could have without this support from the U.S. Had this biased support never occurred, Israel would have come to terms, peaceful terms, with its neighbors years ago, and everybody would be far better off today. But as it was, Israel was able to use the sword almost without limit, able to maraud through villages, destroy hundreds of Palestinian villages, extend its control over all of what was once Greater Israel 2,000 years ago, which pleased some of the people that were enabled to settle throughout this area. But it certainly caused outrage throughout the entire Arab world, the entire Muslim world. And everyone in the Muslim world knew firsthand of the bias in U.S. policy and the impact that that bias had on the fate of the Palestinians, most of whom are Muslim. And the result has been catastrophic. We are no longer revered, we're reviled. And the repair work is going to take many, many years, and unfortunately it hasn't even begun today. Things are getting worse and worse. I wonder what life is going to be for my grandchildren, and certainly for the next generation beyond that. America today is not the America that my generation fought to protect in World War II. It's a changed America. It's a frightened America. It's America on edge, all because of the bias in public policy. Because this bias happening year after year after year after year, involving billions of dollars, all spent to the advantage of the Israelis, to the disadvantage of Arab Muslims, has caused fury the like of which we have never known as a nation before. It's a time when we need resolute national leadership, but none is on the horizon. I report that with sadness. There was a time when a U.S. president stopped a war in the Middle East, but I see no one on the horizon as yet who has the courage, the wisdom, the good sense to be resolute about policy in the Middle East, make it pro-American for a change. Get away from the bias. George Washington gave us some good advice in his farewell address. He said, avoid foreign entanglements. Avoid a passionate attachment to another nation. Now, he was fearful about the citizens of this country renewing their attachment to the British. That was the foreign country that he feared passionate attachment might occur with. Today, it's not Britain, of course, it's Israel. The passionate attachment that the lobby has been able to generate is an attachment that is simply unknown to most Americans. They have no idea of the devastating impact this attachment has brought upon them. And the price can't be calculated today, and it's going to get bigger as time goes on. It's a cause that I feel I have to be involved in. I've been criticized broadly because I criticize the behavior of Israel. Some people call me anti-Semitic. That's not a fair definition of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism, by the dictionary, is hostility to an entire race or nationality or religion. This is the behavior of a government that I have opposed, that I have criticized, that I have done my best to change over the past 30 years. Here I am, 83, I ought to be doing other things perhaps, but I cannot let this problem go untended. I find my voice is not quite as lonely as it once was. There are signs of public understanding, of public resolve to change our government policy. It hasn't happened yet, but I'm an optimist. I wouldn't be doing this if I was hopeless. But I know it. The reform has to come because our country has the greatest potential on earth. I believe deeply that the American people, once they're informed, once they're aroused by the facts, they will bring about change swiftly. And it'll be good change. And if I can do a little bit, I hope that you can do a little bit, we work together on this, change will come. Cynthia McKinney of Georgia, an African-American woman, spoke out in defense of Palestinians several years ago. Money from Wall Street defeated her in her bid for re-election. But now she has returned, and through some happy, unplanned circumstances, she has been renominated as Democratic candidate for re-election. And I'm sure that the result in November will be her return to Congress. Now, she may not last. I imagine the same swords will be out after her once she takes the oath of office, and they'll try to organize so that she'll be defeated next time around. But it does show that miracles can happen on Capitol Hill. I was the #1 target of Israel in 1980, again in 1982. They organized financial support for my opponent that came from every state in the Union. Now, I represent just a little corner of Illinois, but they were able to get support from pro-Israel people all over the country, many of them sending the maximum of $1,000 or $2,000. And the attack was so heavy and so efficient that I went under a tiny margin, but I lost out. 2 years later, Charles Percy was their #1 target. And the lobby for Israel focused totally on the defeat of Charles Percy. And when he went down, he was defeated by Paul Simon, a fine man. But Percy had stood up to the lobby. He had not always cooperated with what they wanted. And they want people who will always cooperate, and they generally get them. But when he was defeated, that was another signal to others who are in Congress. Well, beware, don't misstep in any realm involving Israel, or you'll have the same fate as Finley and Percy. They are highly efficient in their lobbying work. They are professionals. They know just how to touch the right buttons. They know, they have people, contact people in every congressional district that they can summon and get them to respond in a very effective way. And the response is like this. They'll call Joe Smith out in Oklahoma and say, "We have an important vote coming up tomorrow. Would you call your representative and do what you can with him?" Well, Joe Smith is one of the 2 or 3 people in that congressional district that have over the years cultivated the friendship of that member of Congress. And his phone call got right through. And he was able, in a very courteous way, to state the case, urge them to vote for this bill, if they could, not be demanding, but make the request in a gentle way. And that type work is effective. And so far, people who are interested in America first instead of Israel first have yet to get organized thoroughly to bring about a change in personnel. After many years on Capitol Hill, I'm inclined to believe that the only hope for changing votes on pro-Israel legislation is to create enough unrest in a particular district to give the sitting member concern about his re-election. As it is, he's afraid if he doesn't support Israel's needs, he'll be defeated. He needs to have a change of heart and fear his defeat if he does simply follow the dictates of the lobby for Israel. The partisans for Israel are very, very effective. They watch all media. If there's anything that puts Israel in a bad light, they immediately go to the leadership of the publication or the radio station or broadcasting station and demand a hearing, demand an apology, demand a change in policy. And they often get results because there is no one pleading the other side. I had a lot of very unpleasant, threatening calls, and I had some of them after I left. I had a couple that could be viewed as death threats. Those were not numerous, but I had a lot of criticism that ranged from thoughtful analysis. I think thoughtful is the wrong word, but analysis that proved my position wrong, to rather hysterical, insulting letters and other communications. The other day, I guess it's been a couple of years ago, had a telephone call from somebody in New York. And he started out in a rather pleasant way. And I thought, well, here's a guy that would really like to talk about Middle East policy. Then he wound up and he said, well, I want you to know the only reason I called you, I wanted to find out how a dirty scumball really sounded. Well, fortunately, that type of response is rare, but it does tend to keep you on your toes. One of the hopes I'm sure that the leadership of Israel has is that more and more Palestinians will simply leave, give up, quit. But the Palestinians that I know, lead me to conclude that they're not going to give up. They're going to stay with it. They're going to protect their rights as best they can. They're going to try to regain their rights that were taken from them militarily by the Israeli onslaughts. And Palestinians tend to have a high birth rate. The day will probably come when they are more numerous than the Israelis in Israel as we know it today. And that may, demographic trends may help to solve the problem. But as of today, we're in a deep hole because we're so heavily biased in favor of Israel. And the whole world knows it. And they're astounded by it. They can't comprehend why America, with its great cherished traditions, would close its eyes to the dreadful punishment that we have enabled Israel to inflict on virtually defenseless people. Hundreds and hundreds of Palestinians dying. We supply the helicopter gunships with which the military forces for Israel can carry out bombings. No sense of justice, no due process whatever. They decide this guy is a problem, we'll shoot him, we'll kill him. Helicopter bombers are able to pinpoint individuals and shoot them. Often they hit the wrong party or kill other people along with the intended target. And that's commonplace, and it doesn't make any news back here in America because the media that we talked about is just as intimidated about the facts on the ground in the Middle East as the rest of the population. A Jew named Alfred Lilienthal is one of my great heroes. He was a young lawyer when Israel came into being. He immediately wrote a book, There Goes the Middle East. He could see immense trouble ahead. He anticipated the effective lobbying that would occur in America to bring about biased policies, which in turn would cause misery, and that misery in turn would motivate people worldwide to be anti-American. He had a newsletter for many years. He's up in years now, as we all are, I guess. And his newsletter was a great inspiration to many people. He was one of the first voices of reason, of compassion. A Jew who was concerned about the human rights of the Palestinians. One of the first. We need lots of them, and we have a growing number. I'm sure that many American Jews are just as concerned about what's happened to America as a result of our biased policy towards Israel, and what has happened to Israel itself. I think when the history of this period is written, it will be determined very, very convincingly that the pro-Israel bias in American policy was a dreadful influence on the future of Judaism. Without that pro-Israel bias, Israel's principles, its regard for human rights that really made it distinctive in the early years, would never have been corrupted as they have been. Now the state of Israel is sort of the god of many Jews. It's their focus, their center of attention. So Judaism has changed for the worse, just as Christianity has, because Christians are the ones who have, through their unawareness, through their lack of good citizenship, have enabled our government to carry out this terrible, unjust, bias policy. Most congressmen know exactly what's going on. They know that our policy has been dreadful. It's an embarrassment. They welcome it when non-record votes occur on aid to Israel. That way they don't have to go down with their name for or against it, and most of them are for it. They want these things to slip through on a voice vote. And many of them are ashamed of what they're doing. But almost all of them have their eye on the next election. And they figure that if they cross Israel, they might find themselves in the same trouble I got into myself. They need to be reassured by people who will stand by them and encourage them, make them have a little backbone. And above all, we need to find some presidential candidates who have some backbone for America. Someone sent me a copy of Assault on the Liberty. Other books show up every day, but I kept that, and I was on one of these so-called junkets, the Codell missions to a foreign country, had a lot of time on the aircraft, and I brought Jim's book with me. It's one of the few books I read in its entirety in the 22 years I was in Congress. We just don't get around to optional reading. We have so much required reading every day that I didn't read many books, but Jim's book I read. And it was one of the most important motivations to get me started, to get me active in this field. Mrs. Finley and I go to the reunions of the Liberty veterans, not every year, but we've been to at least 5 or 6. And it's such an inspiration to hear the veterans speak. If their story could somehow be brought throughout the nation, into every living room, boy, overnight there'd be big changes in Washington. Because the brutality they suffered is terrible. I think everyone who's worn a Navy uniform has a deep attachment to the Navy. We're proud of it. We want its heroes to be honored. And on June the 6th, I believe it was, 1967, our so-called friend and ally Israel sought to sink the ship and everybody aboard without a trace. No question but what they wanted that to happen. The evidence is overwhelming, there's just no doubt. And 34 sailors died. Some of them burned to death by napalm. Others shot to death on the deck by fighter aircraft. Others killed amidships when torpedo boats put gigantic holes in the side. And these sailors and their survivors should be saluted as among the great heroes of the U.S. Navy. Remember the Maine? That was for so many years a slogan that really quickened the heartbeat. Well, remember the Liberty should have been the same thing, but our president at the time, Lyndon Johnson, was so immersed in and overwhelmed by Vietnam that he made a terrible mistake. He ordered the cover-up of this disaster, this daylight assault on an unarmed ship that caused the death of 34 and injury to nearly 200 others. They should be honored in every way by the Congress, by the President. There ought to be suitable memorials to them in many, many places. The government finally gave the Congressional Medal of Honor to the captain, but not in a ceremony in the White House, as every other Congressional Medal of Honor award was made, but in a remote, unpublicized ceremony at the Navy Yard. Admiral Moore said it was as if they had handed the medal to him under the 14th Street Bridge. It was that minor as an event. It should have been major. Unbelievably, our sailors were threatened with court-martial if they said one word about what actually happened. Sailors aboard the Liberty. It is a story of bravery and survival that's almost unsurpassed. And yet it's unknown today by the American people. Congress has never been willing to have one day's hearing on the subject. I'm trying to think of the last name of the congressman from Florida. Charles, I'll think of his name in a minute. He was a veteran of World War II. He had a limp dating back to the war. He was such a straight arrow that he wouldn't take government-paid trips to other countries while he was in Congress. He took pride in the fact that he never missed a roll call or a quorum call during all the years he was in Congress, and he never did. He was on the Armed Services Committee. He was chairman of the Sea Power Committee. And he was passed over for the chairmanship. They had a little revolution, Democratic side, and he was passed over. And he decided not to run again. It was his last term in office. He was chairman of the Sea Power Committee. He had no chance for advancement in the committee. He had all of the honors he ever could expect to get. He had no political concern because he was not going to run for re-election. I went in to talk to him. Charles Bennett of Florida. All of us revered him for his patriotism, his attention to duty, and all that. Went in to ask him if he would consider scheduling hearings of the Sea Power Subcommittee that he chaired. It would be a wonderful gesture to the survivors of the Liberty. And I knew that of his great feeling for the Navy, and I hoped that he would consider doing that. He stood up. He was angry. He always used a cane. He pounded the cane on the floor. He said, "I won't do it. All that would do would be to upset some of my friends in Jacksonville, Florida," meaning the Jewish community. It would have been so easy, so easy. And indeed, it would have brought honor to his name for breaking the silence of these years, but he wouldn't do it. It suggests the enormous, intimidating influence of the lobby. he thought more of the possible hurt feelings of some pro-Israel constituents than he did of the honor that these sailors deserved. Recognition. The truth. In researching for my book, They Dare to Speak Out, I talked to a retired, very senior member of the FBI. And he was one of a number who talked to me very candidly, but on condition that I would not mention his name in the book. I had no one who turned me down for an interview, but a number of them said they would not cooperate if I printed their name. But this one told me that he can remember a time when there were at least a dozen cases of spying by Israel that the FBI did nothing to, because they knew that when it finally got to the top step of the ladder for action, the answer would be no, forget it. Spying by Israel dates way back to the beginning of Israel. They don't resort just on spying as we know it. They develop these human relation techniques that open doors. For example, they ingratiate themselves with a particular official that deals with secrets. In the Pentagon, they get ready access to him, take him out to lunch and dinner, and have fun with him, and maybe play tennis. And they get to be buddies, not representing different countries, but buddies. And there will be a document of great importance in the inbox of the desk of this official of DOD, the Defense Department. And he will go to some other chore, and it'll just be easy for the Israeli official to pick up the document and put it in his pocket. And even if the U.S. officer knew it was happening, he would say, well, what the heck, they're friends of the United States. We ought to share that with them anyway. I found evidence after evidence that Israel always got the top secret documents it wanted, whether by direct spying or through other informal ways. Jonathan Pollard was the one exception. He's still in prison. I still wonder why he was singled out, because he wasn't the only one copying documents by the hundreds. Why did they prosecute him? I imagine it was a courageous agent within the FBI that decided to put his own career on the line and finally pushed it through. Well, I'm glad he did, because the hearings, the aftermath, have brought to light a lot about Israeli chicanery. One State Department official told me that the theft of secrets by Israel was so prevalent throughout the government, that he recommended at one point that they simply let Israel have anything they wanted. They're going to get it anyway. Why force them to force U.S. personnel to be complicit in some of these misdeeds? And the material that has been taken wrongly by Israel has often been copied. Enables them to get into weapons related manufacturing and find markets competing with our own industry in the same field. They always make some tiny change in the product to make it made in Israel, designed in Israel, but the basic element is still a bit of theft from the U.S. government. It, I'm sure, has been a tremendous asset to Israel in its own military aggression against its neighbors. The American people have no idea, I'm sure, that the moment Israel was established, it began using military force as a means of expanding its territory by force of arms. One of the acts specifically outlawed in the Charter of the United Nations, the inadmissibility of the acquisition of territory by force of arms, outlawed by the UN. And our government has witnessed this violation of that law every day since, and has provided Israel with the wherewithal to do it. We just maybe cluck or tap their wrist a bit, but let it go on. We have never, except for the administration of Dwight Eisenhower, really insisted on obedience to the law. It's not too late. Actually, the lobby for Israel in the realm of Middle East policy owns the entire Congress, not just select few. They focus on the committees that handle the bills dealing with legislation for Israel or for the Middle East. You can go through the list of Republicans, Democrats alike, and you'll find, I don't think you'll find anybody that's critical of Israel on the committee. In fact, you can't really find an outspoken critic of Israel anywhere in the Congress. Anywhere. Even Bob Byrd, who once in a while speaks up, is very cautious about mentioning the word Israel. Senator Hollings made an excellent statement about who benefits from the war in Iraq. It was plain to him, and he said everyone in Congress knows that the war was undertaken to help Israel. Not America, but Israel. But he said it in the twilight of his career on his way out of office. I'm glad he said it. I'm glad for that. But I wish he'd been saying it for years, year after year, and getting others to join in with it. When I left Congress, I didn't want to lose, of course. But as I thought back, if I could have persuaded 5 or 6 other members of Congress to join with me every time I spoke up, so that it was 6 or 8 voices, not just one, it would have confounded the lobby for Israel. They would have had a bigger task. They would have had to take on all of us, not just one. As it is, they pick us off one by one. That was my experience, at least. The one who becomes the loudest critic of Israel, even though the criticism is very moderate, is top of their list. They rub that person out, then maybe somebody else. Every lobby needs an enemy, and I was their favorite enemy for a long time. Charles Percy was chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, or the Foreign Affairs Committee, Foreign Relations Committee of the Senate. He supported every money bill for Israel, no exception ever. In fact, he offered amendments to increase aid to Israel beyond what the administration requested. You'd think he would be guaranteed enthusiastic support from the lobby for Israel. But his sin was supporting 2 bills that provided military assistance, very moderate military assistance to Saudi Arabia. Bills that Israel opposed. And those bills were enacted. They are the only 2 bills that Israel has opposed that became law. And Percy voted for both of them. And for that reason, when Paul Simon came along wanting to get in the Senate, they backed him and spent all of their resources that year to defeat Percy. He was one of them. Pete McCloskey, Paul McCloskey of California, was sort of a rebel on other occasions. He ran for president against Richard Nixon for a while. He was a candidate for nomination against Richard Nixon because of his opposition to the Vietnam War. He wanted Nixon to close it down fast, as I did. But after I was defeated, and after Percy was defeated, Pete McCloskey ran for the Republican nomination in California. Maybe you remember that time. I certainly remember it. He was widely known throughout the state, well known and favorably known. But the lobby for Israel decided that he might, just might, get elected to the Senate. So they went into the primary. And they saw to it that Pete was not nominated for the Senate. Otherwise, I think he was expected to win and become a U.S. Senator and a critic of Israel. He had been very outspoken on several occasions. He even went to Beirut during the dreadful bombing of Beirut by U.S. warplanes supplied by the U.S. to Israel. Slaughter that killed four times as many innocent civilians as those who died in New York on 9/11. He went there and he met with Arafat. And that was a brave act. And he spoke out in criticism of U.S. aid to Israel because he said that some of the victims would hold up a shard or something like that with Made in USA on it. It was plain to the victims in Beirut that even though U.S. military personnel didn't pull the triggers, they didn't drop the bombs, they supplied the bombs free of charge and did not demand that the assault stop. Adlai Stevenson, a Democrat, one of my other heroes, offered amendments in Congress to cut aid to Israel a few times. He didn't get any place, but he tried. He was in the Senate. He decided to run for governor of Illinois, a position his father had occupied with distinction. And there is no question but what the lobby for Israel in Chicago area singled him out for trouble, passed the word that he was really anti-Semitic, and cost him enough votes to deny him election as governor. Those are the big names that went under. Cynthia McKinney was defeated because she was rather outspoken about Palestinian plight while a member of the House, and a great lady. I was delighted to be able to support her in her bid for re-election, and I know that she's going to do great things in years to come. She has the spark of determination that I believe will put her back in Congress again. There are others that I probably am not aware of, but those were the prominent ones that were defeated. And believe me, if I were running for Congress or running for re-election and I saw what happened to me, what happened to Percy, what happened to Pete McCloskey, and I really wanted to win, would I brave the storm and fight the lobby? Well, I hope there are such people, but they're few in number so far. The media like every other sector of our society, is thoroughly intimidated by the lobby for Israel. There was an episode I heard about that related to the Sun-Times in Chicago. One of the editorial writers I interviewed for my book, They Dare Speak Out, his name was Neth, N-E-T-H. He was on the editorial board. He said, well, I want you to see how things work. Every day there would be a delegation of Jews outside the office wanting to be heard. They had some complaint about this or that story or editorial. And they did a good job. They kept pressure on until they got something in the way of retraction or correction. And I said, well, how often did you have any delegations there complaining about the injustice of Palestinians or any characterizations of Islam that were incorrect? He said they were as rare as hen's teeth. They just didn't exist. So you can understand the scene in the editorial offices sometimes. All they got was pressure from one side and nothing from the other side. AIPAC divides up the entire membership and allocates every member to one of their professional, highly skilled sales personnel. They focus heavily on the Appropriations Committee and the Foreign Affairs Committee, but they don't neglect anybody. Every member is on somebody's list. They watch what they say, watch the resolutions they introduce, they make their acquaintance, they try to be on cordial, friendly terms, and for the most part, I think they're very reliable. I had a man assigned to me named Ralph Nurnberger, a PhD, a great guy, and he never once misled me on anything. But it was his job to watch my every move. He was a good resource, actually. I could test out ideas for accuracy and avoid some missteps. But he was very cordial. He was a joy to be with. And imagine that was the experience of others. Now, did they handpick people to be on particular staffs? I don't believe that AIPAC had that as one of their services. But they were nevertheless very visible. The representatives were highly skilled. And every member, I'm sure, was aware of the hazard of not towing the line that AIPAC wanted. They were far more influential on the voting habits of the members than the members' constituencies. Sad but true. Every member wants to get reelected. And sadly, for most of them, that is foremost over anything else. I hate to say that, but it's true. They can turn on or off political trouble back home. They're effective on election day, not just with money. But if they have somebody they're having difficulty controlling completely, they're apt to line up a good candidate to oppose that member. And of course the member will realize that and naturally be sensitive.